Welcome to Mystery and Mortar, where we reveal the secrets of our most bizarre landmarks, houses and monuments. Stories and legacies that have never been told until now. In the Australian town of Ararat is an old prison built in gold rush days and converted to a dreaded lunatic asylum to hold the most dangerous of men. J Ward holds the dubious record of housing Bill Wallace, the world's oldest ever prisoner, who died in 1989, aged 107 years.
War brings out the best and worst in people, and also some strange coincidences, such as that during the First World War, Hitler's commanding officer was a Jew named Ernst Hess. In 1940, as Europe was ablaze, a British steamer, the Dunera, berthed at Sydney's docks, discharging thousands of men of mainly Jewish background, one being a banker named Karl Solmitz. His story is quite remarkable. During World War I, aged 18 years, he was conscripted into the German Army's most dangerous section, the Artillery Observers Brigade, a squad that was sent to crawl or burrow far away into no man's land, beyond their front line, to get as close as possible to the enemy, to report as to where their army's artillery shells landed, how efficient the shelling was, and how much havoc the bombardment caused. It was perilous work, these soldiers having to avoid crossfire, sniper fire, bombardment and artillery charges. They were sitting ducks. When World War I ended, Solmitz resumed his apprenticeship in his father's bank. He, for the next 21 years, quietly being sent throughout Germany to learn banking skills. During the rise of Nazi Germany, as a result of Kristallnacht, that awful night in November 1938, when German Jewish shops, offices and synagogues were smashed and looted, Solmitz and his sister fled from Germany for the UK, where he was interned as an enemy alien, then transported aboard the SS Dunera to an internment camp in Hay, New South Wales. Australian authorities soon realised that these Jews weren't a threat, for which they were released, Solmitz becoming a soldier in the Australian Army. Upon war's end, he moved to Melbourne, where he moved into this magnificent mansion in Melbourne's South Yarra, where he stayed until the late 1960s, upon which he moved to the United States. His old house in Melbourne still stands, although now is one of genteel poverty. It's since having been a vet surgery and is now divided into apartments. Karl Solmitz's biography is fascinating in that following his service in the German Army during World War I, he was given the Ehrenkreuz Medal, the Imperial German Cross of Honour, and subsequently for his service in the Second World War in the Australian Army, he was awarded the George Medal. 2 medals in 2 world wars fought on opposing sides. Whatever became of Karl Solmitz, or whither his fortune led him, there is no record.
In Melbourne's leafy Kew Cemetery stands a monumental tomb, perpetuating the memory of Annie Springthorpe, who died in 1897 at the tender age of 30 years. The monument is colossal, a replica of a Grecian temple complete with pillars of black marble supporting an ornate roof of multicoloured glass, beneath which her white marble sarcophagus lies. The structure drips verse, grieving her loss in ancient Greek, Hebrew, Latin and English. But curiously, nowhere on this structure does her name appear, because her funeral was marred with revenge. As the story goes, Annie Inglis was from a wealthy family of colonial Melbourne merchants. At age 20 years, she married an older man, a doctor, by the name of John Springthorpe. Her family became suspicious, her relatives persuading her to make a will that upon her death, her substantial inheritance would revert back to them after funeral costs had been paid. But Dr. Springthorpe's wife's will didn't state how much her funeral should cost. So when she died in childbirth a decade later, he built for her a truly monumental tomb. One of dark Doric columns made of imported Scottish granite, he engaged a famous London sculptor to carve from the finest Italian marble a life-size image of his wife being fawned over by an angel, a grieving figure kneeling aside her vault. So vast was the work that it took 4 years before she was buried here. And if it was replicated today, it would cost in the vicinity of $7 million. As a final twist, Dr. Springthorpe insisted on bronze snakeheads, potent symbolism of serpents as guardians of temples and sacred spaces, and revenge. He paid for attendants to maintain an external gas flame until every penny of her estate was spent. The heavy rope barriers on this mausoleum have long since perished, and the attendants are gone. But there was another twist in the fate of Annie Springthorpe, one that almost defies belief. She was born on January the 26th, 1867, married on January the 26th, 1887, and was buried on January the 26th, 1897. But fate had not finished with its maddening pranks, for when he died years later, it was discovered that in becoming so absorbed in his building of the tomb that he'd neglected to pay for the land on which the tomb stands.
In the heart of Melbourne, Australia, stands a curious concrete dome. Millions of people have passed by, and yet very few would know it was a mission to seafarers. It was built by the grandparents of one of Australia's most famous Prime Ministers. The mission's chapel is still there today, the pulpit being the miniature stern of a windjammer.
In the 1850s, gold was discovered in Victoria. Hundreds of thousands of men came from all over the world seeking their fortune in the colony of Victoria. This is the eastern end of Melbourne, which at the time was the scarlet heart of the city. In between these towering buildings of concrete and glass stands a single 2-bedroom cottage. That's all that's left of that busy period at the end of the 1800s. This tiny cottage was once a brothel. As the area degenerated, the churches moved in to save the downtrodden. Every city has its amazing and obscure little stories, and Melbourne's no exception. One of the most fascinating stories here is of the Methodist Church. Its first service was held just down here on the banks of the Yarra, with only 5 people in attendance. The Wesleyan Methodists in Melbourne left us a fascinating legacy. Come on, let's go and have a look. This wall looks like any other wall in the city. The story behind this wall goes back to the First World War, when thousands of diggers returned in anticipation of jobs that had been promised to them. They found none. Hungry men became angry men, for which the church came to the rescue. Behind this wall was a soup kitchen. Many of the men who returned from the European battlefields were severely traumatised by their experiences, leaving some, unfortunately, unstable. The wall had slots built in it to protect the women behind, who served the meals.
Not far away is a grand old mansion constructed by a wealthy Jewish arms manufacturer to impress the snobbish colonials. He imported not only stone, but craftsmen from Italy to create a temple befitting his beloved wife. He died before it was completed. In 1938, after being turned into a brothel, 2 gangsters shot it out. A bullet hole is still visible in the glass above the head of his unsmiling wife. I'm John Wood. On Mystery and Mortar we tell these stories and many fascinating others.